Right about now, you might be wondering whether to get a new iPhone. Now, for some of you, that might be a question of which new iPhone to get. Basically, should you get the big new iPhone, the iPhone XS Max, or the smallish new iPhone, the iPhone XS? But for others, the question might be whether or not to get a new iPhone at all, considering that over the past couple of years, new iPhones have crept up to $1,000 or more. I mean, really, what are you getting for that much money? I've been using the new iPhones for the past 5 days. Now, on the inside, they have the kind of stuff that people within the tech sector are really excited about, like the 7nm A12 Bionic chip, a super fast processor that sets a new industry standard. You also get a great camera and all of the stuff that living in iOS has to offer. But it takes some really close side-by-side comparisons to figure out what's new about these new phones. And I think a lot of people won't feel the need to upgrade if they already bought last year's phone. Let's start with the exterior. The iPhone XS looks exactly like last year's iPhone X. They're the same size, and this one has the same 5.8-inch diagonal OLED display. And like last year's phone, this one feels really nice in the hand, although it is slippery and it is prone to smudges. The iPhone XS Max, on the other hand, is big. It's roughly the same size as last year's iPhone 8 Plus, but this one has a 6.5-inch display, which means it has a much greater screen-to-body ratio. The iPhone XS Max also has the notch at the top for camera and depth sensors, and just like its smaller counterpart, it has no home button. Both are made of stainless steel and are coated in what Apple says is a strengthened, more durable glass than on last year's phone. These also come in a gold finish. Both of these new phones have an IP68 waterproof and dustproof rating, which means it's okay to be in water up to 1.5 meters for about a half hour. But this is not actually new for the industry. I mean, LG and Samsung already have this on their phones as well. So if you're one of those people who are deciding between two new iPhones, then what you really have to decide is how big you want to go. I mean, while this display is really nice for certain things, it does feel big to me, kind of like the iPhone 8 Plus felt once I tried the iPhone X. I think for a lot of people, this is the ideal size. Another thing to keep in mind about the Max, the notch stands out a lot when you're using split screen view. Both of these phones are said to have improved battery life, but in the case of the iPhone XS Max, it's because it's a physically bigger phone and it ships with a bigger battery. Now in the case of the iPhone XS, it has about the same battery as last year's iPhone X, but you're supposed to get about 30 minutes more per charge. In my experience, I didn't really notice a difference. I thought it was pretty much negligible. One thing I did notice was the new speakers. Apple has tweaked both the hardware and the software on the speakers to create a wider stereo sound, and they sound pretty great. But when it comes to the new iPhones, it's really what's on the inside that counts. The most important part of the new iPhone XS and XS Max is the new chip. This is the thing that's going to justify the cost, if anything is going to. This new chip, which Apple calls the A12 Bionic, is a 7nm chip with a 6-core CPU, a 4-core GPU, and an 8-core neural engine, which is the part of the chip that handles AI stuff. What does all of this mean? Basically, this processor is supposed to help with everything from advanced gaming to app switching to AR apps to apps that use AI and machine learning. The chip's neural engine is available for developers to use now too, so third-party apps are about to get a lot smarter. Apple is pushing for advances like the Galaga AR game and this really cool-looking home court basketball analysis app that they showed off at the phone's launch. Although when we tried to get a demo of home court, Apple said the software wasn't ready. The added processing power in this year's phones, plus a larger sensor, mean a better camera. And unlike the past few years when plus-sized iPhones had better cameras than their smaller counterparts, this year's two new phones have exactly the same camera, so there's no differentiation there. Now, at first glance, a lot of the camera stuff doesn't seem new. Apple already captured HDR automatically in last year's phones, so why is it calling it Smart HDR now and saying it's new? And hasn't bokeh been around in photography forever? Trust me, I had all of these thoughts. But when I went out and tested the new camera and compared it to older iPhones as well as some other flagship phones, I could see the difference in some of the photos. So we're in a spot right now where there's a lot of shade, but the sky is very bright, the background is very light. You can see bright spots, highlights on buildings. So we're looking to see whether or not things look really blown out as the camera adjusts for that lighter exposure, or whether it does a good job of retaining color even as things brighten in the background. And I have to say, overall, I think that this does a better job overall with photos than last year's iPhone X. So you can definitely see the difference here. The colors are a lot richer. If anyone were to look at this, they would say this is the better photo. And then when it comes to this bokeh effect in portrait mode, you can now adjust the depth after you've captured a photo. Apple says it's not just isolating the foreground and then slapping a blur on the background. It says it's recreating the f-stops to blur things proportionally to how close they are to the subject. So let's try it out. After I capture it, you can tap on it, hit edit, and then basically you can adjust the f-stop after the fact, which changes the depth around, the background of the photo. This is supposed to be better than the way that other smartphone makers are doing this. And in some cases that seemed to be true, but it's still not quite the same as the bokeh effect you'd get with a DSLR. Okay, so there are some obvious differences between this year's new phones and last year's phones. One being the giant display on the iPhone XS Max and the new improved processor that's shipping in both of these phones. But some of the differences are extremely subtle, and that's a good reminder that this is an S year for iPhones. It's usually a time when we see incremental internal updates, and Apple tries to convince you that they're totally worth it. If you happen to be ready for an upgrade and you can afford these phones, you're not going to be unhappy with them. But again, if you already have last year's new phones, you probably won't feel the need to upgrade this year. And that's the thing about having these amazingly powerful mini computers in our pockets. Even if you have an iPhone that's a few years older, it's still a pretty darn good smartphone.